We've been manufacturing vaccines for many years, and many technologies have been discovered to facilitate the newer vaccines. One of the big things that happened in this particular instance was what we call Operation Warp Speed, which was announced on May the 15th as a federal initiative including the Department of Defense, HHS, CDC, the US FDA, and the NIH. And what this did in effect is allow companies, not only US companies, but around the world, to collaborate and to cooperate, and actually encouraged them to do that. And so in normal times this would have been known as collusion, but with Operation Warp Speed in effect, they were actually encouraged to share information and to work cooperatively. And so they used existing technology, they cooperated and collaborated, and they basically cut through a lot of the bureaucratic morass that goes on in the background whenever a typical drug or vaccine is in development. So they were able to take shortcuts on the paperwork, but they did not take any shortcuts on the efficacy and safety data. The testing was very solid. The vaccines that are approved with an EUA, or emergency use authorization, right now have very solid safety and efficacy data. None of the vaccines that are currently in use or appear to be imminently coming on the market actually contain any of the actual viral particles. The two that we have right now, Pfizer and Moderna, both use something called messenger RNA. If you remember your high school biology, RNA is part of the genetic material that we all have in our bodies. And what the companies have done is, in the laboratory, they've manufactured a little tiny bit of messenger RNA, so it's laboratory generated, not taken from the virus. And this messenger RNA is mixed with little tiny globules of fat and frozen. And then before it is administered, it's thawed. And in the case of Pfizer, we add saline or salt water to the vial. In the case of Moderna, it comes pre-mixed, but we have to thaw it. And so neither of the vaccines, neither Pfizer nor Moderna, contain any preservatives. They contain salt water, a little bit of sugar, some little tiny globules of fat, and this little tiny bit of messenger RNA. You can sort of think of it as a little bit of computer code or genetic code, again, laboratory generated, not taken from the actual virus. The vaccine is injected into your arm, the deltoid, or that side. When it's injected, your body's immune system recognizes those little tiny globules of fat as being foreign or abnormal. They're not supposed to be there. And so some of your immune cells attack and absorb those globules of fat, which is what they're supposed to do. Once in the cytoplasm of the cell, if you think of an egg, you've got the yellow, that would be the nucleus. You've got the white, that is the cytoplasm of the cell. The messenger RNA is released into the cytoplasm of the cell. It does not go into the nucleus, and it goes into something called a ribosome, and think of that as the protein manufacturing plant in a cell. And so the messenger RNA goes into the manufacturing center and takes over the protein manufacturing capability of that ribosome, and it induces your body to make spike proteins, the same spike proteins that are actually on the coronavirus. Those are then released, and the remaining part of your immune system sees this spike protein, recognizes that as being abnormal, and responds to it in a normal manner by making what we call blocking antibodies. And so the idea is that if you ever become infected with the real coronavirus, your immune system will recognize those same spike proteins and will respond to them, releasing blocking antibodies and preventing the coronavirus from causing you to become sick. The messenger RNA, as I said, stays in the cytoplasm. It does not go into the nucleus. There is no way that that messenger RNA is going to change your DNA. Well, the most common side effects are, fevers and chills and muscle aches, headaches, a stiff neck. If you think about it, since we are inducing your body to manufacture a portion of the actual coronavirus, the symptoms are very similar to what somebody might expect if they were infected with the coronavirus. Again, it's usually fevers, chills, muscle aches, soreness at the site of injection, a headache. What you don't typically get from the vaccine is the nasal stuffiness and congestion that you would get if you had the actual infection, because you're really only reacting to the spike protein. A few people have more significant reactions if there's something in the vaccine called PEG, and a very, very, very low percentage of people will react to that. But those are the most common side effects. There are very, very few people who actually cannot take the vaccine. Let's run through some scenarios of people who may be concerned but who actually can take the vaccine. If you have been infected with COVID-19, can you take the vaccine? Yes, it's actually recommended that you take the vaccine after you have cleared your isolation protocol. If you're allergic to peanuts, shellfish, ant bites, or bee stings, can you take the vaccine? Yes, there is no cross-reactivity with this little bit of messenger RNA with any of those other things. Even women who are pregnant can take the vaccine. We would encourage you to talk to your OBGYN, but since women who are pregnant tend to have a little worse outcome if they are infected, and since we are not aware of any complications of the pregnancy, related to the vaccine, it's recommended that they be vaccinated. Likewise, women who are breastfeeding or lactating can also take the vaccine. What about people who are post-op or have had recent chemotherapy? They are recommended to receive the vaccine because they have a somewhat weakened immune system and would be at increased risk of having a poor outcome if they got infected. Those people may have a less robust immune response to the vaccine, but it still will have a protective effect in them. The only absolute contraindications actually are somebody who has had an anaphylactic reaction to some component of the vaccine. And earlier I mentioned something called PEG, or polyethylene glycol. If you've had an anaphylactic reaction to that, then you should not receive these vaccines. If you got the first dose and were unlucky enough to have an anaphylactic reaction, you would not get the second dose. And a couple of other cautionary positions would be, if you had COVID and were treated with either monoclonal antibody therapy or convalescent plasma, we would recommend that you wait 90 days before you receive the vaccination. And one other caveat is that you should not take any other vaccination within 2 weeks of this one, or receive this within 2 weeks of another vaccination. So say you got a dose of Shingrix, you should wait at least 2 weeks before you're vaccinated for COVID-19. To achieve what they call full immunization status, you're really supposed to wait until 2 weeks after your second dose of vaccine. but you begin developing the immune response fairly quickly, like with other vaccines. And actually, after about 3 weeks or so, you will likely have a pretty good immune response and have some significant level of protection. But full immunity comes 2 weeks after the second dose. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we still recommend that people wear masks, socially distance, wash their hands, avoid crowds. The reason for that is we're not absolutely certain that the vaccines protect you from developing an asymptomatic infection and still being able to spread the virus to others. We know they are extremely effective in preventing severe illness, hospitalization, and death. And that's the way the studies were designed, was to measure the protection against those things. They were not designed to determine whether or not the vaccines prevented you from developing a very asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic infection. Many people feel that they're so effective in preventing severe illness that they must also prevent the asymptomatic infection. And there are a couple of studies, small studies, that do support that position. But at the moment, as they say, school is still out on that question. Well, the answer is a definite maybe. You're considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after your second dose of either Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. So, if at least 2 weeks have passed since you have received your second dose, and you are exposed to a known case of COVID, as long as you remain asymptomatic, and it has been less than 3 months after your second dose, you do not have to quarantine. So, to be fully vaccinated 2 weeks after the second dose, and then that's sort of gives you a grace period of 3 months from that point on, where if you are exposed to a known case, as long as you remain asymptomatic, you do not have to quarantine. We would like to achieve what we call herd immunity, and that would be herd as in a herd of cows, not like I heard it on the grapevine or heard it through the grapevine. What happens with herd immunity is that you're very unlikely to bump into somebody who is carrying the virus because everybody else is also immune. The reason it is important for us to collectively develop herd immunity is that there are some people who will not be able to take the vaccine, and there are others who, for some reason, may just have a very poor response to the vaccine. That's not common, but it can happen. And so if everybody else is immune and is not carrying the virus, then the likelihood that one of those people who is not protected, the likelihood of them bumping into somebody who can give it to them is almost zero. And so that's why herd immunity is so important. And herd immunity would also cut down on the possibility of new variants developing because the amount of circulating virus in the general population would be very, very low. Well, once again, that's one of those big unknowns. We don't know for sure. Some people feel that this may become what we call an endemic illness like influenza. It's sort of there all the time in the background, and periodically we have a flare-up of it. Again, that's not known for sure. I think Moderna is already developing a study, or about to begin a study looking at the effects of a booster dose vaccine, and it could very easily be that just like your annual flu shot, we wind up getting an annual coronavirus shot. But at the moment, again, that's still not known for sure. We talked a little bit about herd immunity, and I think it is very important for all of us to attempt to achieve herd immunity, and it's actually a lot safer to achieve herd immunity through immunization than it is by letting or having everyone become infected, because some of those people who are infected with it are going to be very ill and have a very poor outcome. So, the preferred method of developing herd immunity is definitely through an immunization campaign. There are at least 2 or 3 other vaccines that we anticipate are on the near horizon. I'm sure that the protective numbers for those will all be a little bit different, but so far all 5 of the vaccines in trials in the U.S. have proven to be extremely effective in preventing severe illness and hospitalization and death. And as one person has been quoted as saying, keep your eyes on the prize, and that's avoiding the hospital and avoiding the morgue. And all of these vaccines are very, very effective in helping you do that.